to ink and paper. The candle flared and the lines danced around them again. Marley felt his stomach flip as he clung close to the candle. He closed his eyes and fought back the rapidly increasing nausea gamely. Presently, the whirligig feeling abated, and Marley opened his eyes to find they were now in a snow-covered park at dusk. Younger Scrooge was there as well, now in the prime of his life, and accompanied by a young woman. Marley drew towards the candle's flame. He found its warmth soothing, and he could feel its effect of bringing him back to sobriety take hold with a pleasant rapidity. Young Scrooge was a handsome fellow. The features that were yet to be twisted into cruelty were strong and fine, but there was a calculating look to the eye, a flickering gaze that lighted upon every object and calculated its worth. Marley noted that the one place that the eye did not alight was the young woman. Yet she only had eyes for Scrooge. As Marley looked upon her, he saw that she was crying. Tears that shone in the candle's light and glittered as they fell. "Another has your love, Ebenezer," said the young lady. "I wish it were not so." "I love no other than you, Isabel," said the young Scrooge, still avoiding her gaze. "Isabel? Belle?" Marley whispered. "Why, this cannot be her. Scrooge said it was a loveless match made by families, and he'd been glad to find a legal way out of his agreement with her." "I have been replaced by a golden idol, my dear," said the woman. "You love your money more than you could ever love me." Marley heard a cry, a strangled sound of frustration and suppressed anger from the younger Scrooge. The older Scrooge was not so restrained. He laughed, a cold, sharp laugh outright. "If I pursued money, why, it's her that made it so," he said. "It was because of that I had to work. We fell in love when I was poor, and I vowed to improve my worldly fortune. Tell her, my boy! Speak, damn it!" But the younger Scrooge stayed silent. "And now you are talking about setting up your own office," she continued. "You see more of your business partner than have I. Perhaps you should propose to marry Mr. Marley." Marley went cold at the mention of his name. Old Scrooge continued to berate his younger self. "Tell Marley that you must put off our partnership. If he says, 'Ebenezer, I'll never do business with you again. I'll blacken your name, run you out of credit and creditability,' take it. Life without Belle is no life at all." "I'd have done no such thing," said Marley sharply, and the white lady shot him a reproving glance. But, Marley wondered, was that true? As Scrooge continued to rage at his younger self, Marley considered, could he honestly say that in the heat of setting up the counting house with the young and brilliant Ebenezer, he'd never said anything rather than the total focus on the project at hand was due? Perhaps he did joke that there was no time for romance. And did his friend take him at face value? To be honest with himself, he could not rightly remember. The mist at Marley's throat thickened, wound a tendril around his chest, and reached for his waist. "Don't," said the young Scrooge at last. "I release you from your promise, Ebenezer," said Belle, "as much to save you from my unhappiness as me from yours." "No!" 3 voices rang out, Scrooge, his younger self, and Marley. All were of the same mind in the moment. "Yes," she countered, "and I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were." The candle flared, and the scene redrew itself once more, lines dancing in the air before them. Marley now felt almost completely sober. Yet, for all the drunkenness had passed off him with supernatural efficiency, he also had started to feel a little too dry of mouth, a little too heavy of head. This situation was not helped by the sudden shriek of an infant, which cut across the air like a whetted knife. It seared into Marley's head and burned its ice-cold pain straight into his very marrow as the miasmic mist around him continued to thicken. The room they found themselves in was loud, for hard after the cry of the infant came the tumultuous barrage of what sounded to Marley's ears to be a mean gross of children, all laughing and larricking, squealing and screeching. The general demeanour was not unlike a genial ransacking of a town by a troop of hyperactive monkeys. In amongst all of this sat the figure of a woman, well-dressed, unbothered by the games that went on around her, and with a tiny bundle in her arms. Marley recognised her at once as the young lady that Scrooge had failed to marry. She was older now, perhaps a little plumper, but the sadness had gone from her eyes. The whole room smelled of Christmas. As this rolled over Marley, he felt the sickness rise in him again. Now, if you were to smell the odour of this room yourself, you'd no doubt find it pleasant. The hot spice of the pudding awaiting its second steaming, the tang of orange peel burning on the fire, the warm embrace of bacon and eggs all hanging in the air. The urge to vomit welled up in Marley once more, which wasn't helped by the sudden violent reappearance of his chains. With an audible thud, the mist around him solidified and bore down upon his body. The sudden weight registered also with the White Lady, whose grip on the candle holder had to rapidly compensate for Marley's sudden extra bulk. Marley was distraught. The chains had returned, and the unfettered movement had gone. The lightness of being had gone. The relief from the constant scraping and clanking, all gone, gone, gone. In a moment, the old torture had thumped back into existence, and Marley fancied it was even heavier than before. But surely that must be a trick of his senses. The chains couldn't add to their bulk, could they? Marley prayed that it was not so. Marley's thoughts were interrupted by the opening of a door and the rush of children towards it. A man entered to cries of "Father!" and was suddenly borne by a deluge of children to the heart of the room, where he was required to give up a ransom. And large ransom it was, of Christmas boxes and presents for all. The horde fell upon these gifts like lions upon prey, and took no time in rending the bows and paper into excited pieces, and displaying the discovered trinket, be it cloth doll, hobby horse, or bat and ball, with unalloyed pride. Marley knew that Scrooge would hate this. He had nothing but contempt for children in the street, and so to see this ragged brood of good stock behaving like savages, he would no doubt be needled to distraction. Marley drew himself to standing and trudged to the edge of the candle holder and peered around. Scrooge was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly panicked that the White Lady had left him behind, he looked up to her and saw that she was laughing. How callous! How dare she to pay so little mind to her charge? But it was only when he followed her gaze that he saw Scrooge. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Scrooge, in amongst the children and laughing as hard as them. Scrooge was throwing piles of paper into the air and stealing time with unattended toys. Scrooge was playing. He had set up an army of little tin figures and arrayed them against a farmyard being constructed by a ruddy-cheeked lad. Could this child see Scrooge? Well, Marley could not tell, but the child could see the advancing army, and he had taken offensive with a pair of wooden chickens. The chickens easily routed the redcoats, and both boy and man laughed at the simple absurdity of the game. Eventually, the cacophony died down. Some of the children dozed in drifts of paper, and others sat and played quieter. As the buzz of the room had abated, it was quiet enough to hear the conversation of the parents. "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon, my love," said the man. Scrooge looked up. It must have been the first time he'd looked properly at this gentleman, for there was recognition in his face immediately. "Oh, who?" asked Isabel. And as if in answer to his former love, Scrooge said, "Wilkins. It's J. something or other Wilkins. I was at school with him. His family owned quite a large part of the South Downs." "Oh, is that so?" asked the White Lady. "You see," said Scrooge, standing violently, scattering the toys and setting the child he'd been playing alongside to crying. "There was a man who could love her and keep her all at once. Money came to him as simply as air comes to the rest of us." Marley cursed his old partner. In this sudden rage, he was talking over the man Wilkins's reply. Yet, Marley gleaned that it was Scrooge himself whom Wilkins had spied during the day, and moreover, that there was sad news of Scrooge's partner, a Mr. Jacob Marley. "Even now," thought Marley, "I'm alive in this world. On the brink of death, perhaps, but yet still alive." It had not, until this moment, occurred to him to seek himself out during the past, and now it seemed he was too late. He remembered those last awful weeks, the pain, the sores, the wish for this all to be over and quickly. That was happening now. And in theory, he still had time to rush to his own deathbed and plead with his aching body to ask for forgiveness, to confess his sins, to turn his eyes to the light and away from the darkness, to do whatever it may take to escape the dreaded chains. He thought of the book that must lie in the Library of All Souls, the book with his name, Marley, printed on the spine. His ledger of debt of feeling, of debt of kindness, of debt of humanity. Could there still be time to rewrite the last entry? But no. Somehow he knew there was not time. The past ticked by too fast with clockwork inevitability. Perhaps it was in this moment that he'd taken his last breath. Perhaps it had been an hour ago. Who could say? He felt a shadow fall over him and he looked up. It was Scrooge, towering above him with tears in his eyes. The same tears that Marley now felt welling within himself, tears of helplessness. "Take me away from this spirit, I beg of you," said Scrooge. "Yes, please," echoed Marley sadly. The White Lady took the candle snuffer and brought it down upon the flame, extinguishing its bright light and bringing all to darkness.